I get a lot of questions on how to move on from the beginner's method on Square-1 to an advanced speed solving method. In this video, I'll show you some of the fundamentals to get you from knowing how to solve the cube to being around sub 30. I will be assuming that you used my tutorial, but most other tutorials on Square-1 are also quite similar, so progressing is also very similar. Unlike other cubes like Debit 3, Square-1 progression is actually pretty straightforward, up to around sub 15. And there aren't any new methods to learn like F12 for Debit 3. Even at the high level, the steps for solving the Square-1 are very similar. Doing Cubeshape, then corner orientation, then edge orientation, then corner permutation, and then finally edge permutation, otherwise known as CS, CO, EO, CP, and EP. Before we get into how to make each of these steps faster, there are a few things that I need to address. First of all, in my tutorial, I chose not to teach notation for Square-1 since it can be intimidating to new solvers. However, if you do want to get faster, learning it is almost necessary. There are tutorials out there on how to use this notation, but here's a quick summary. In a pair of coordinates, the left number represents the top layer and the right number represents the bottom layer. If the number is negative, move the layer counterclockwise, and if not, move it clockwise. Corners are worth 2 and edges are worth 1. So do as many moves as the notation might show. Finally, a slash is just a slice move. So for example, let's say we have an algorithm that goes like this on the screen right now. So first, let's do the left coordinate, which is just 3. So we're going to move the top layer clockwise. So edges are worth 1, corners are worth 2. So first do 1 for the edge, and then 2 more for the corner. Then we have 3 on top. The right coordinate says -1, so move the bottom layer counterclockwise. So since the number is 1, just move it by one edge, which is just this edge. Boom. And that's -1. And then finally the slash at the end. That's it for this notation. While knowing this notation is important to learn algs, I would still recommend breaking down algs similarly to my tutorial, by breaking it into U, D, and M2 moves. This makes them much easier to memorize than just a bunch of random coordinates. Next, it's quite important to talk about turning. Here's the same alg performed in 2 different ways. Try to find out which one is better. As you can probably tell, the first alg was done much faster. The reason is because it's done regripless, meaning my right hand is never regripping for the slice moves. This allows you to turn much faster, which is why I recommend this turning style for all algs. So for all the algs that you will learn in Square-1 and all the algs that you already know, make sure you're doing the regripless in this way. I would highly recommend watching my Fingertricks video first to know how this turning style works, and maybe search up how other people Fingertricks certain algs to copy their moves. There are some rare cases where you would regrip once or twice in an alg because of it being too awkward, but I would say around 90% of the time, your algs should be regripless. Now that we got notation and turning out of the way, let's talk about each step of this method. Let's start with CS. This is quite a difficult step where beginners often lose a lot of time on, but my advice is just to practice it a lot and experiment with new things. A lot of this step is just being familiar with cases and knowing how to build edges together efficiently into 8 in a row. So if you do this step a lot, you should become more familiar with this step. Worry more about efficiency than turning fast when it comes to making the 8, but when you finally get 8 in a row, make sure you're doing this algorithm regripless and fast, since you're doing it every single solve. A bit later, when you're more comfortable with this method, consider learning intermediate CS. That video gives you more options of shapes you can build, so you don't have to always build 8, and you can build different shapes depending on the scramble, which helps a lot. Next, let's get into CO. This is a very simple step and should be eventually done just in one look. Here I would focus more on efficiency than turning speed, and make sure that every solution you do is the one you think solves CO in the least number of moves. In my tutorial, I show a very straightforward method for doing CO, but in your solves try to be a bit more creative. Don't always follow the rules from the tutorial, and instead explore which moves solve CO the fastest. In tough cases, I would highly recommend watching my CO tutorial, which shows for the most part the most efficient ways to do every single case. For EO, my video teaches 2 very important EO cases. However, if you do want to improve, you should learn the rest of the cases, which is just a few algs more. I do have an EO tutorial which I do recommend, but my best tip in memorizing these algs is just find the M2 present in all the algs, which makes them so much easier to memorize. In addition, you'll notice that many of the algs are quite similar, which should help you memorize them. Next, for CP, I would also recommend learning the rest of these algs. I teach one very important alg in my tutorial, but there are a few more left, and they're all very easy to learn. I would also recommend my CP tutorial for these cases, and I give really nice tips on memorizing those algs in that tutorial. One minor thing is that one of the algs I teach in that video is a bit different from the alg in my tutorial, but you can choose whichever you like better, or just learn both if you want. Finally, for EP, This is also a step that a lot of beginners struggle on. So far I only taught one EP alg, but I would highly recommend learning a lot more. And again, I would refer to my EP video for this. That video is quite advanced, so maybe focus on the first half of that video. Another recommendation is not to do EP one layer at a time, but try to find ways to solve both layers simultaneously. The way to do this is to try to solve as many edges on top and bottom as possible, and usually have an alg at the end to solve the rest. My EP video covers a ton of cases, so if you struggle with a case, make sure to refer to that video. Again, the key to EP algs is focusing on the M2, since it is present in a lot of algs. One thing I did not talk about yet is the dreaded parity. In my tutorial, I taught to do parity simply by doing it during CP, because the alg is much shorter. However, for getting fast, I actually recommend doing parity during EP, since in that step, parity is easier to recognize. The alg is quite long, which is why most people don't want to learn it, but it can actually be done pretty fast, and doing parity in EP saves a huge pause during CP. Also, more advanced solvers would learn multiple parity EP algs to solve an EP and parry at the same time for several cases. Now, if you don't want to learn this long alg, it is fine to do the method taught in my tutorial, but just know that it will probably slow down your times with longer pauses trying to recognize it. The other option is to do parity during CP as usual, but learn algs to solve CP and parity at the same time, otherwise known as CP parity. I'm not the hugest fan of this method, but if you are interested, you could learn all of these algs as well to avoid parity during EP. However, either way, you still will have to learn several long algorithms. Again, while these algorithms are quite helpful, they aren't really necessary for sub 30, so you can decide if you want to learn it. So before I end this video, I do want to show off two example solves. One will be a bit more simple and one will be a bit more complex. So hopefully these example solves should give you an idea of what your solve should be looking like. Here's the first one. The Square-1 should be on screen right now if you do want to follow along. For this first solve, I see a lot of pairs of 2, which means making the 8 would be pretty easy. If you get this case, connect these pairs in as little moves as possible and you should get 8 pretty easily. One thing you do want to take advantage of is that the middle layer is flipped, which means you can start like this or like this, which is a pretty nice tip. So I think I'll start like this because I think it's easier to slice up to bring this edge pair up. So this should be pretty simple. Just bring 1 up to make the 4. I think pairing through the back for the second pair is going to be a bit easier. There's a bit less moves. So pair it through the back, insert to make the 6, and then pair it through the front to make the 8. Very simple. Then from here, do this algorithm, and make sure you know how to do this regripless. So, like something like this. That way it's a bit faster. This is a seal case you should probably memorize. It's pretty simple. Whenever you have opposites, just make the pair like this. And then the pair should be on bottom as well, so you just connect them like that. This EO case is pretty simple and was shown in my video. However, if you get a case that wasn't shown in my video, you do want to learn that algorithm. But for this one, do it regripless. So I'll do something like this. And 2. Like that. Unless you're looking for the corners, you don't always have to look for the solve corners. Whenever you see opposite corners and you see not opposite corners on the side, that means opposite of the opposite corners is going to be the solve corners. So whenever you see opposite colors like this, there's going to be a really high chance that the solve corners are opposite of it. So here we could just immediately do U2, D2 and then do this algorithm with the corners in front, knowing that they're both in the back. Again, a pretty easy CP case right there, but if you do get a harder one, you should also know those algorithms as well. Finally, here we have 2 U-perms. Pretty lucky we got no parity here. I think one great way to solve this thing is just to do opposite and then just solve the rest. So opposite goes like this. You hold the bars on the left or the right, it doesn't matter, but it has to be on the sides, not the front and back. Here just do M2, U2, M2, M2, U2, M2. Then you're always left with adjacent like this. And we could just do this out pretty simply. So yeah, pretty straightforward to solve right there. So here's the second example solve, which will be a bit more advanced. So the cube shape we got right here isn't that nice. We have 2 pairs here, but the rest on the bottom is all separated edges, which is not that great. So first I'll try my best to pair as many edges as possible together. So I'll bring one of these L's up to the top like this to create 3 now. Then we have these 2 shapes here. And we put one on the left and one on the right like this and slice up. We get 2 scallops here, which is just pretty much 4 edges in a row. All we have to do here is just separate the scallops into the top and bottom layers, and then just do this algorithm regripless. Like that. Next for the seal, I think a lot of people like to bring up the 2 first and then insert the last corner by itself. But the optimal way of doing the seal is just to bring up this white up here like this, and then solve the rest like this. For this EO case, this is also a case that's not shown in my video. However, this is a case that I show in my EO video. And this algorithm goes like this. Again, you want to do it regripless. So you want to watch the EO tutorial for this algorithm. Then for CP, nothing special here. I see the opposites here, which means the bar is in the back here, as expected. And we have another bar in front here. So we just go ahead and do this CP algorithm. Here we have no parity, so we are quite lucky. However, this EP case is not that great. There are 2 common mistakes here. Some people might do O up to solve the bottom layer, or adjacent to solve the top layer. But again, for EP, don't solve one layer at a time. Instead, try to find out what's the best solution to solve both layers at the same time. What I'll do instead is actually try to set up an easier case, which is just a double U-perm. And that's an EP case that you want to go into a lot for your EPs. So here I could do adjacent from this angle, like this. So I'm not trying to solve these edges, but trying to force the U-perm on both layers. Now we have 2 U-perms. We can solve this all in one algorithm. If you don't know this algorithm, you can do the opposite algorithm, then the adjacent algorithm. But since I do know the algorithm, it goes like this. And that just shows how beneficial it is to know some simple EP algorithms. Finally, to end this video off, I'll be showing one more example solve with only EP. Since the 2 previous solves didn't have parity, this solve will have parity to show you guys how to deal with EP parity. Again, if you know more parity EPs, it's going to be much better for you and it's going to give you much more options to reduce your EPs into. However, for this example solve, I'll be just reducing to the common adjacent parity on the top. So for this EP, I'll be trying to solve as many edges as possible and then leave parity towards the end. So if you do the adjacent algorithm on the bottom here, that's just these 2, which can solve 2 pieces, which is pretty good. For the top layer, this swap doesn't solve any pieces, but if I do a U prime, this swap does. So I'll do adjacent from this angle to solve 1 edge on top and 2 edges on bottom. Now I'm left with this case, which is just U-perm and then adjacent. This is a very common case, and I would recommend learning all the algorithms with combos of U-perms and adjacent because they're just so common. However, if you don't know this algorithm, it's fine. You can just go ahead and solve these last 2 edges and solve 1 more edge on top, like here, to force an adjacent parity algorithm. And then finally we have this algorithm. And we're done.
But that's pretty much it on how to progress from just solving a square 1 to sub 30 and beyond. As you can see, other than the algs, the path is not too bad, especially since you don't have to learn any new method. Again, the main points are to turn correctly with mostly regripless algs, be efficient during steps like CS, CO, and EP, and learn the algs for EO, CP, and EP. From there, just do a ton of practice and your time should go down pretty fast. For more additional tips, I have a video on over 100 tips for improving on Square 1, along with lots of other Square 1 content, if you're interested. If you do have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and I will be happy to help you out. Thank you all for watching, and hopefully you found this video informative.